Every year, millions of people are forced to flee their homes in order to keep safe from more persecution or natural disasters. Those who have to leave their country are called refugees, and the International World Refugee Day aims to raise awareness of this issue, which affects millions of people across the world. The latest figures from the United Nations suggest that every minute, around 25 people have to leave everything behind in search of a safer life.
The World Refugee Day is a day that the United Nations started to commemorate since 2001. And it's a day for us as states, international community, individuals, private sector, everybody, to celebrate the tolerance and resilience of refugees, and to remember their suffering, and to be involved in any way that we, whatever our capacity is, can do to contribute to solving the problem of refugees.
Nearly 80 million people worldwide uprooted at the middle of 2020 after fleeing wars or persecution, a record figure capping a tumultuous decade of displacement. According to the UNHCR, the figure rose by some 9 million from a year earlier and is close to double the 41 million recorded in 2010, despite COVID-19 restrictions slowing down movement.
All over the world, there are about 80 million people of concern to UNHCR. That is mainly refugees, asylum seekers, internally displaced people, stateless people. There are refugees, IDPs, stateless persons, and returnees, asylum seekers all over the world. There is no country that is immune to the fact that from time to time they have to receive and help and contribute to the solutions of such persons of concern to UNHCR.
The UNHCR annual flagship report shows Syrians, Venezuelans, Afghans, South Sudanese, and Rohingya from Myanmar top the list of 80 million refugees, asylum seekers, and internally displaced people. This is in fact approximately 1% of the world population. 30 to 34% are under the age of 18. There are over 170,000 unaccompanied children worldwide, the children traveling without any parents. Thousands of children become separated from their parents or lose them to violence. They are left with no choice but to endure long journeys to safety on their own. Many times these journeys are dangerous, and some people don't make it to their final destination. Often they gather in places called refugee camps, which are giant camps with many thousands of people living there, often in poor conditions. The camps are usually managed by charities and can be as big as cities. They aim to offer some form of safety to people who have had to leave their homes behind. Some camps have hospitals and even schools, where children can continue with their education. Other camps have nothing at all.
We have 80 million refugees and asylum seekers and internally displaced people all over the world that we have to care for from the day they have to flee their homes to the day they're back to their homes or they are resettled in another country for good. Simple stuff like the documentation, because when you flee your country, your ID is not valid anymore, right? If you're lucky to have a passport, can you renew it? So eventually, and you don't go through the proper borders. You cross any border you find without having a stamp on your passport if you have it. And if you were lucky to collect it before you had to flee. So eventually it starts with the documentation. UNHCR provides kind of documentation for these people that makes them legal refugees in the country they are in. So if they're stopped at any checkpoint, they are not deported, right? And with this comes the shelter, the tents, clothing stuff, food, education, medical, and you name it. World Refugee Day is every day, honestly. Not only because I am working for the UNHCR. You know, with the problems that are recurring and never stopping, the number of refugees is increasing year on year. And now we're seeing more climate refugees. It doesn't have to be war. It could be drought. It could be a hurricane. It could, you name it. And then eventually people have to leave their homes. And these people, unless we help them, they're not going to survive. And when you're at the brink of non-survival, you might do things which are unthinkable. So we can help mitigate all these problems. And because nobody is, like COVID now, nobody is safe unless everybody is safe, right? Same with refugees. Nobody can rest unless everybody have a decent life. It's everybody's problem, honestly.
In the last year alone, there have been 40.5 million people newly displaced. Although the issue of displacement affects all nations, data showed that it was poorer countries which hosted 85% of those forced from their home. Escalating violence and the long-running conflicts have fueled some of the world's fastest-growing displacement crises, such as those in Ethiopia, Syria, and Afghanistan, which continue to force large numbers of people to flee. Weather-related events, primarily storms and floods, were responsible for 98% of all disaster displacement. Intense cyclone seasons in the Americas, South Asia, and East Asia and the Pacific, and extended rainy seasons across the Middle East and Sub-Saharan Africa uprooted millions of people. Cyclone Amphan alone triggered around 5 million displacements across Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, and Myanmar.
First, I would like to thank you for approaching us in this sad yet very important day in which we stand together in solidarity to honor the courage and perseverance of women, men, and children around the world who are forced to flee their homes under threats of conflict and violence. As of June 2020, the UN estimates that there is approximately 80 million people around the world who have been forcibly displaced, the highest figure ever recorded, with around 46 million registered as IDPs and another 26 million people officially registered as refugees. Most sadly, the majority of them are within our region and very close to home, and I'm referring here to the protracted and catastrophic Syrian refugees crisis.
World Refugee Day is an international day designated by the United Nations to honor refugees around the globe. It falls each year on June 20th and celebrates the strength and courage of people who have been forced to flee their home country to escape conflict or persecution. World Refugee Day is an occasion to build empathy and understanding for their plight and to recognize their resilience in rebuilding their lives. World Refugee Day shines a light on the rights, needs, and dreams of refugees, helping to mobilize political will and resources so refugees can not only survive but also thrive. While it is important to protect and improve the lives of refugees every single day, international days like World Refugee Day help to focus global attention on the plight of those fleeing conflict or persecution. And many activities held on World Refugee Day create opportunities to support refugees.
World Refugee Day is basically a chance for the world to show solidarity and showcase refugees as humans with dreams, aspirations, and hopes. So we usually encourage countries, governments, private sector individuals to highlight that they're individuals that are productive, rather a burden. So basically people can advocate for refugees, can fundraise for refugees, can also do some kids activities because it's a huge issue, it's a huge international issue, and I think that everyone from all ages should be fully aware of what's going on.
World Refugee Day falls each year on June 20th and is dedicated to refugees around the globe. World Refugee Day was held globally for the first time on June 20th, 2001. Commemorating the 50th anniversary of the 1951 Convention relating to the status of refugees. It was originally known as Africa Refugee Day before the United Nations General Assembly officially designated it as an international day in December of 2000. Each year, World Refugee Day is marked by a variety of events in many countries around the globe in support of refugees. These activities are led by or involve refugees themselves. Government officials host communities, companies, celebrities, school children, and the general public, among others. We mark this year's World Refugee Day in the midst of dramatic social change. A pandemic has tested our strength and highlighted systemic inequalities. It has also connected us in new ways and renewed our motivation to act for equality. This year's commemoration focused on supporting refugees across the globe to be protected and included in healthcare, education, and sport.
Every year, the World Refugee Day is remembered with a theme. This year's the theme was Together We Heal, We Learn, and We Shine. As you know, the last year and this year is dominated by the COVID-19 pandemic. It is an added hardship to the refugees on their way from their homes throughout the asylum process until, if they are lucky, reach safety, because many of them die or get injured during their fleeing. Together We Heal is focusing on the health needs of refugees and having them the ability to access health care at affordable prices and at the necessary level that is needed to contribute to their health care. Together We Learn as well, giving refugees access to education. And Together We Shine, mainly to focus on the refugees themselves, their ability, their power. Refugees are not victims, but as such, they are victims of violence, they are victims of terrorism, they are victims of violation of human rights, but they are potential power. If we give them the opportunity, they can contribute to solving their own problems and sometimes to solving problems of the host communities. For example, in the COVID-19, many refugees volunteers to help the governments, the host communities in fighting this. We had doctors, nurses who were refugees who saved lives. If you give the refugee an opportunity, he or she will contribute positively. The main focus of the Together We Shine will be this year in the sports, with all what sports carries with it, of meanings, of values, etc. Sports helps the body, helps the mind, helps the community, etc. But it's not, of course, limited to sports, but the focus is on the sports.
As an instance, UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency, works together with partners and host communities to make sure that people forced to flee their homes receive the healthcare they need. Besides, the UN agency is providing refugee children access to quality education so they can pursue better lives and build better futures. Across the world, only 3% of young refugees are enrolled in some form of higher education. This is shockingly low, and the UNHCR aims to increase that proportion to 15% by 2030. The UNHCR also uses sport to create safe and protective environments where everyone can discover their potential. Sport can enrich the lives of people forced to flee their homes. It can boost mental health and help refugees gain confidence, forge new friendships, and feel welcome in their new societies.
Kuwait is a prominent state when it comes to providing humanitarian support in general. Throughout its history, Kuwait was an active international player in the region and all over the world internationally. If we are talking about Kuwait relationship with UNHCR, it is a deep-rooted relationship that started in 1999, immediately after the liberation of Kuwait. And it was always considered as a strategic partner to UNHCR. Kuwait contributed to helping millions of refugees, asylum seekers, IDPs all over the world by supporting UNHCR programs. For example, if we look at Kuwait during the last 10 years and collect all the contributions they provided to UNHCR, we can say that Kuwait is the #1 state, the first state across the region and maybe beyond to a certain extent. This is why Kuwait was always referred to by the General Assembly of the United Nations as the hub of international humanitarian work.
Kuwait is unbelievably humanitarian. You cannot imagine how surprised I am, how happily surprised I am when I joined the team here in Kuwait. Philanthropy is everywhere, not only on the government or on the emir or the political side of the spectrum, but also on the public. Yani I never saw a country that's so forefront, so upcoming, whenever any emergency happens in the world. Even lately, with COVID, with Palestine, Gaza now, anytime, you see people just flocking to help and support. So it's unbelievable. It's so lovely. In Kuwait, they are really advanced. The private sector, in general, the foundations and المنظمات, the NGOs and stuff, they are very, very well advanced when it comes to philanthropy. And there's a system in place. So the system is very clear. The political system, to get the approvals and stuff is very clear. They apply, they get it, they fundraise, and they fund, and they're very well advanced in funding. You can see that sometimes they are in places that even the UNHCR is not there yet. They're quicker, by the way, too. So when we start a campaign for an emergency, they're usually there already helping, providing aid and support. So the system is clear, and the will is there, too.
The state of Kuwait is an important donor and a generous partner to the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, providing long-standing support to its operations within the Middle East. The UN Refugee Agency has been present in Kuwait since 1991. Through its contributions, Kuwait provides vital assistance for emergency programming, permitting the UNHCR to deliver essential services and meet the needs of refugees and internally displaced people. Kuwait is not a country of asylum in the traditional sense. Despite that, the state of Kuwait has played a major role in supporting asylum issues and financing UNHCR's activities in various parts of the world, becoming a model for humanitarian aid. Kuwait thus supports international humanitarianism and has made several significant contributions to the UNHCR, amounting more than $400 million since 2013. It also further provided a $1 million grant as an annual core contribution to the UNHCR. Kuwait therefore became a pioneer country in humanitarian philanthropy and international humanitarian initiatives, and a leader in hosting a multiplicity of related activities.
So UNHCR have been around for the past 70 years, and although initially it was supposed to just last for 3 years back in the 1950s, after World War II, but because of the continuous needs and humanitarian aid that is very much needed, we're now at our 70th anniversary. And in Kuwait, we've been here for the past 30 years. We were lucky to be welcomed by the government of Kuwait back in 1991. And basically, Kuwait have been a very substantial strategic partner since that time.
The state of Kuwait has been keen on backing the Palestinian cause, the core issue of Arabs in international arenas, through demanding a halt of the occupation aggression and recognizing legitimate rights of the Palestinians. The government of Kuwait has contributed over $5 million to the United Nations Relief and Work Agency for Palestinian refugees in the Near East. This generous contribution to the agency funded its Syria operations and improved living conditions for over 500,000 Palestinian refugees in Syria, who continue to endure harsh conditions after many years of armed conflict. Kuwait has extended continuous support to the UNRWA over the years and has been strongly committed to the operations of the agency. Kuwait has long been an important and consistent donor to the agency, with contributions amassing a sum of over $135 million, including $65 million for the agency's operations in Syria. This support from the Kuwaiti government, as well as Kuwaiti-based organizations such as the International Islamic Charity Organization, the Kuwait Fund for Arab Economic Development, and the Kuwait Red Crescent Society. This enables the agency to continue to provide essential services to some 5.4 million Palestinian refugees across the Middle East. As of 2020, the UNRWA has partnered with Kuwait Red Crescent Society to protect food assistance and healthcare treatments for thousands of Palestinian refugees facing increased vulnerability due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Its contribution towards the agency's Zakat-certified emergency food assistance program in Gaza has subsequently reached thousands of Palestinian refugee households that depend on the agency for quarterly food assistance. In addition, Kuwait's Red Crescent Society made a critical contribution to the agency's COVID-19 appeal to ensure the UNRWA's health department had the supplies necessary to continue providing life-saving care to Palestinian refugees throughout the COVID-19 pandemic.
So since our establishment and opening our office in Kuwait have been nothing but a strategic partner. We have showcased the Kuwaiti support to humanitarian aid internationally without differentiating between gender, geographic location, religion, or anything else. So basically, there is an open door policy between Kuwait and UN agencies in general and UNHCR to be specific. And we had many field missions. We had fundraising campaigns that were the first of its kind. And we've been lucky enough to have been supported by Kuwait by contributions reaching around $500 million to support the Syrian situation, Yemen situation, and other situations around the world. We really hope that a political solution would be coming in soon. We are still looking for a light at the end of the tunnel, but because of the economic implications of COVID-19 and the political disruption that's happening around it, we don't see that much of a change in the refugee situation. Although, if you even compare it when it comes to numbers, back in 2016, the refugees and persons of concern, UNHCR persons of concern, were 60 million. Now we're at 90 million, and this is the highest number in history.
Kuwait's continuous commitment to international humanitarian work and its strategic partnerships with international humanitarian organizations and the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees is clearly represented by the Kuwait Fund for Arab Economic Development and its civil society. These institutions have worked towards maintaining respect for human rights and opportunities in creating a safe environment and a way of life.
UNHCR was the first UN agency to sign an MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding, with Kuwait Fund for Arab Economic Development back in 2016. And we have since then been implementing 2 projects. We have for Syrian refugees in northern Iraq. KFAD have shown a lot of support, a lot of understanding, and a lot of great contribution to helping refugees around the world, focusing on the Syrian refugees in northern Iraq. We have helped through the Kuwaiti government, along with Kuwait Fund for Arab Economic Development, more than 7 million Syrian refugees around the world. And this is something that we are very thankful for, and it's a very strategic partnership that we are proud of.
Throughout history, millions of refugees have benefited from refugee rights and international support. Many owe their lives to the system of international protection. It was after World War II that countries from all over the world agreed to grant fundamental rights to refugees. These rights were established in the 1951 Convention relating to the status of refugees. So what rights does this convention provide? One of its most important principles is that people cannot be sent back to their country of origin if this puts them at risk because of conflict or persecution. This principle is known as non-refoulement. Once they have crossed a border, refugees have the right to remain in safety in another country. This right includes more than just physical safety. Refugees should receive at least the same rights and basic help as any other foreigner who is a legal resident. These rights include freedom of thought, of movement, and freedom from torture and degrading treatment. The Refugee Convention also grants refugees social and economic rights in the host country. These include the right to work and to access education, the right to provide for themselves and their families, as well as the right to access health services. Some will be able to return home if the situation in their country becomes safe again. Those who cannot return remain. They can integrate in their host countries and try to get on with their lives. They learn the language, go to school, get a job, and in some cases, they will even become citizens of their host country. Depending on their situation, some refugees may be transferred from a first country of asylum to another country in a process called resettlement. Resettled refugees go through a very rigorous selection process involving UNHCR and the receiving country.